Right, it's been a little while since I've done one of these Lord of the Rings videos, but we finished the Fellowship, and now we'll move on to the Two Towers, the first three chapters of which I don't probably have as much to say about as some of the chapters in the Fellowship of the Ring. I think there are still some of the characteristic, deceptively archaic features of Tolkien's English. He loves to use maybe in a way that is, of course, actually legitimately archaic, but I think the word maybe sometimes sounds too colloquial to modern speakers, right? A mile maybe from Parthgalen and a little glade not far from the lake he found Boromir, off quote. Of course, it's a mile, it may be. Actually reads very archaic to me, but I wonder if it sounds too colloquial to some modern readers. There are some things here just plot-wise that surprised me. In the departure of Boromir, quote, "The river of Gondor will take care at least that no evil creature dishonors his bones," off quote. I didn't know that rivers could take care to do things, but occasionally we seem to kind of tread close to an almost animistic world here where, you know, foxes and rivers and whatever have stories to tell and decisions they make. Hard to tell if we should take that literally or just as sort of an expression of, you know, whoever controls this, be that Eru Iluvatar or fate or something like that, is willing this to happen. I don't know, but that occasionally touch of what seems like animism reminds me of the Kalevala, if nothing else. It's just, again, in content, something that appealed to me. There's this quick exchange between Aragorn and Gimli, quote, "But after that we must guess the riddles if we are to choose our course rightly," answered Aragorn. "Maybe there is no right choice," said Gimli, off quote. I thought, maybe there is no right choice. I mean, that's in its way, a very strong stance, right? To acknowledge that perhaps there isn't some clear, obvious right way to go forward, but that we have to make some decision. Very conscious of advice like that and this time in our own lives. A lot more evidence of just how conscious Tolkien is of his invented world. I mean, he's conscious of where the wind direction is when Aragorn is tracking. And I mean, actually, Sam was conscious of the wind direction earlier too. The way that Aragorn is sort of agonizing over his choice following Merry and Pippin and the orcs that have them captive, and whether he's making the right choice and being so uncertain of it seems realistic and more sympathetic to me than the sort of all-knowing hero that we sometimes are used to, and which I think sometimes Tolkien kind of wants to make some other characters, but I like that at least we get to legitimately feel that Aragorn really doesn't know if he's doing the right thing or not. I think that's really the strongest thing about Chapter 1, and it's not much that draws on any Old Norse knowledge or anything like that, but it's a appealingly human side of these characters, so I enjoyed the chapter. I'll start with some comments on Chapter 2, The Riders of Rohan, here in a moment. Let me just give you a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost. So in Chapter 2, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas continue to track these orcs who have Merry and Pippin captive. Aragorn has these incredible tracking abilities and is able to tell that the orcs are actually fighting among themselves. Of course, the very fact that they are makes them as enemies more interesting, right? They're not a uniform hive mind. There's dissension within those ranks. I thought that it was interesting to read a physical description of the land of Rohan that, quote, it swelled like a green sea up to the very foot of the Emin Muil, off quote. I think in the movies, the sense that I got of this land, and maybe I'm whatever the name of that phenomenon is, where you're tricking your own memory. But I thought in the movies that the Rohan there was more of a golden brown to sage green prairie, but that may be the influence of my own memory from years ago seeing it, just because I'm used to not very green prairies. Maybe it's greener in the movies than I remember. We read some place names in Rohan here, like East Emnet. Not immediately clear to me as an Old English place name, and I thought about it as a while, what Emnet might be. There could be a clear answer to this, and I'm just not sure what it is. There's a word that's used as a noun a few times around this chapter. For example, Aragorn says, quote, but north lies our road between Down and Fen when day returns, off quote. I mean, Fen, I know is swamp, but it's not a word I would ever say. I had to really just look up Down. I would never have used this as a noun for a place. Apparently it's an archaic word for hill, potentially related to Welsh Dean. It's interesting. Another word that I don't think very many people would know is this one used by Legolas, quote, reed, R-E-D-E, oft is found at the rising of the sun, off quote. Of course, that's cognate with Old Norse roð, R long A, eth, Old English rad, meaning advice, counsel, but I don't know that anyone today uses it that way. I also don't know exactly what to expect from, quote, the windy uplands of the wold of Rohan, off quote. Is that a forest like der Wald, the German cognate? Because it's sometimes what that means in English, or is it a hilly area? Because that's sometimes what it means in English. I'm not sure. Gimli's sense of humor sometimes seems very Old Norse to me. When Aragorn says, quote, we may get news from them, Gimli says, or spears, off quote. That really seems like Norse saga humor to me, and even has a little bit of a Havamalish ring, like the man who avoids conflict his whole life may find that spears spare him, but old age does not. I think it's Havamal 16 or so. When they finally meet the writers of Rohan, we get a lot of Old English. We also get some kind of ancient classism, right? The lord that they encounter, Eomer, is taller than the other guys. It's very common in ancient sources that the taller guy is kind of the leader. Although I guess you see that in our movies too. We have assumptions about taller people. I guess I would have wished that a fantasy world might be past such prejudices. I'm still kind of trying to figure out what elves and dwarves really look like in Tolkien's imagination, because Eomer asks all three of them, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, quote, are you elvish folk, off quote. So do elves not look different from people? Could elves look like anybody? I don't know. He looks down at the dwarf, quote, staring down at the dwarf, off quote. So I guess dwarves are short, or at least Gimli is, but still, I think it's interesting that Tolkien is kind of letting you imagine what an elf or a dwarf is and not just telling it to you. I noticed the archaic Theoden king rather than King Theoden. This is something I teach students early on when they're reading Old Norse, that titles follow names, and the same in Old English typically. So Theoden king sounds just like, Sigmundur Konungur in Old Norse. Håkon Jarl, the Lord Håkon, the Jarl named Håkon. Very, very typical. And of course, Theoden is son of Thengel, a word for Lord in Old English. It is interesting to remember, as I think I've mentioned before, that Beowulf is Hringa Thengel, the Lord of the Rings at one point in Beowulf. hobbits or dwarves may be child height, based on the fact that Aragorn says to Éomer, quote, they would be small, only children to your eyes. And then Éomer responds, quote, there were no dwarves nor children, off quote. So I guess dwarves, hobbits, kids are all sort of height. I'm still trying to figure out what these look like. All right, then we get a bunch of Rohanic names, which are generally easy to translate from Old English. Eothane would be horse servant, of course. Eomer, horse famed, horse famous. Eored, horse council. By the way, in the midst of all these names, there was the quote, the men of the mark do not lie, and therefore they are not easily deceived, off quote. I don't know. I'm not sure that not lying makes you harder to lie to, but, maybe. Gandalf Greyhaim, of course, that would mean gray skin, related to Old Norse hamr, the one's outer appearance, guy's skin. Saruman, it occurs to me, coming up right here, is of course an Old English name itself. Searu is Old English term for it would be translated in Old Norse by like vel, it's device, it's cunning, or a product of device or cunning, like a machine. So he's the man of cunning or even machines. Isengard, Isengard, of course, iron enclosure. Orthanc, artifice, skill. It's related to actually thank, which is from the same root as thought, but this is in its thought sense, not its thankfulness sense. Artifice, the cunning man who lives in his tower of artifice within his enclosure of iron. The names are quite transparent in Old English. We hear Shadowfax called the chief of the Mearas, which is plural word for horses in Old English. It's not, of course, it's related to mare, but that's the feminine to an old masculine word, which is what's being used here. The great horse of Eorl. Eorl is cognate with the Norse noble title Jarl. Of course, it's the origin of English Earl, although I don't think that Earl is a good translation of Jarl most of the time. Earl is a lower thing than Jarl in an Old Norse context. The fact that leaders in Rohan are called marshals, of course, must be significant. Mar, there again, we have that old masculine equivalent to the feminine word mare. So horse, shal, from the same word as Old Norse skulker, servant. So like the horse servant is originally what marshal means. It makes perfect, clever sense that should be a big title of nobility in Rohan. We get an Old English word, as far as I can tell, just straight Old English. I don't think anyone uses this in modern English. Dwemer crafty. Dwemer in Old English is illusion, so Dwemer crafty, strong, and illusion. Of course, for Saruman. Some orcs are called, quote, more fell than all others, off quote. Of course, actually, fell on its own doesn't occur in Old English, but it's common in compounds such as wile fell, bloodthirsty, thirsty, eager for carnage. Eomund, that's another Old English name. Horse hand. Edoras, that's dwellings. Edor just means a dwelling in Old English. There's Meduseld, straightforward, literally just mead hall. Meduseld. We have the horse is given to Aragorn. Hasufel, gray pelt. Hasu is a word used in Old English, and it's cognated in Old Norse hos, especially for gray animals like a wolf or a rabbit. So I guess sort of a rabbity colored horse. His previous owner was Garulf, spear wolf, the Old Norse Gerulfr. We have another horse named Arod, just means swift, quick, fast. And that about ends that big section of Old English names. It's in Chapter 2. Chapter 3, I had just about no real commentary on, other than I couldn't really figure out what orcs look like. We read that one has a, quote, filthy jowl and hairy ear. But Merry and Pippin worry about being mistaken for orcs, so I wonder if they look as unhuman. And another one has a, quote, long hairy arm. None of this sounds like really unhuman looking, so I wonder if they look like different species like they do in the movies. Because Pippin says, quote, "It will not be any comfort to us if these riders discover that we are not orcs after we are dead," off quote. I mean, if you can mistake a hobbit for an orc, then I guess an orc and a hobbit don't look that different. I thought that there was probably a shout out at the very end of this chapter, a very subtle shout out to Völuspá and the creation stanzas there, somewhere around stanza 5 or 6, because when the two hobbits are wandering in the forest, it's as if, quote, it's as if they were, quote, elf children in the deeps of time, peering out of the wild wood in wonder at their first dawn, off quote. So Tolkien is thinking about a first dawn. And then just 2 paragraphs down, he says, quote, "The sun's limb was lifted, an arc of fire above the margin of the world," off quote. So I've talked about how in the stanza of Völuspá, which is stanza, I want to say 6, but let me just make sure. Stanza 5 in Koningsbok in the Codex Regius, the Poetic, we have Sol varp sunnan sinne måna hände in i högre himmenjordur. So the sun shone from the south, or cast from the south, its right hand, the sun is the companion of the moon, cast its right hand over the heavenly horses. Now in the Högsbok manuscript, that says not himmenjordur, heaven the horses, but Jodr, which might mean rim, although it would be a mutated form of that word that we don't usually see. We usually see it as Jadar in Norse. A lot of editors, including potentially an editor that Tolkien read, combine these two readings so that we take the himmen from Koningsbok and put it on that potential rim word from Högsbok, and they read himmen. God, I hate these stupid Mac effects. Himmenjordur, heavenly rim. And in that case, we actually wind up with Tolkien sounding like he's just about quoting Völuspá chapter 5, as edited to combine the Koningsbok and the Högsbok manuscripts. The sun's limb was lifted, an arc of fire above the margin of the world. Margin of the world would be a good translation of Himmenjordur or Himmenjadar. So I wonder if that's a really subtle shout out, either deliberate or because he had just been reading Völuspá and felt those words bouncing around in his mind as something that appealed to him. I don't know. Possibility. Well, thanks for following along with this series. I hope everyone out there is having a good holiday season, whatever particular holiday you celebrate and whenever. And thanks, Patreon, for your continued support of this and so many other videos on this channel. And remember, if you need really last-minute shopping, there's an Amazon shop where you can support the channel a little bit. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'll wish you all the best.